gentlemen, I'm here representing the element Earth and Latvian identity, and yet the person who stands before you left her native city, Riga, at the age of 6, only to return to it at the age of 60, and to be elected president 8 months later, president of a country without ever having belonged to a political party, without having undergone an election campaign, which we normally think of as part of a democratic process, without having spent a red cent in election expenses. Not exactly your typical political path. However, the path that I did follow has given me some unique experiences and insights, and it is those that I'd like to share with you, in spite of the fact that the earth on which I was born, the ground that my feet were treading for most of my life, was not that of my native land, but was scattered across 6 different countries on 3 different continents, where in the course of time I had to acquire 5 different languages and drop a few on the way, which I didn't quite master. How in all this strange pattern could one become president of a country and an expert in its identity would seem like a paradox, but alas, it's but one of 3 main patterns of identity that the Latvian nation has developed because of historical events as a consequence of the Second World War. After the first occupation and annexation by the Soviet Union, the following Nazi occupation, involvement of Latvians on both sides of the warring parties against international conventions, and then 3 patterns developed. Some, like my parents and those of my husband, left and went into exile with their children, hoping to return when the international community would ensure Latvia's independence again, which of course did not happen. Poor souls, they had never heard of the protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and even less of Yalta and Tehran, where the Allies had been involved. The second pattern was of those who were forcibly deported to Siberia, and their lives have been documented in films and documentaries, which you have occasion, if you stay in Latvia, you will have occasion to see during our song festival, which is upcoming in a few weeks. And finally, of course, the majority of people stayed here in Latvia, but stayed here in a country that was submitted to totalitarian rule, to a foreign occupation, a military presence, and an imposed ideology and economic system. I speak mostly, of course, from the perspective, first of those who went into exile, but then of those who returned and tried to heal the various separate parts of our nation, the branches that had been cut off from the common tree, to remind them all that they do grow from the same historical soil, the same past, the same cultural traditions, and that those are the ones that essentially give us our identity. But my own identity formation was by no means an easy path, and this is why I spent much of my spare time, apart, of course, from my career, my academic career as a loyal, contributing, and reasonably successful Canadian academic, I spent much of my time struggling to bring up my children, born abroad from the Latvian point of view, born in Montreal, native-born Canadians at that rate, and the children of many other Latvians in different continents, South America, Australia, Europe, the United States, Canada, to try and inculcate in them a sense of what it means to be a Latvian and why. And I came to the conclusion that identity is a complex process where being Latvian or German or American or Chinese or anything whatever is only one of the layers of something like an onion in your psyche, where each of us, are part of many groups, conglomerates, associations, identities. We belong to many, many people with whom we can identify in a multiplicity of ways. We are, in fact, more like the bulb of a lily than that of an onion. Lilies having these different scales, and those are part of different aspects of our personality. But there are some essential elements of identity that remain constant. And one of them is what I call the automatic, the natural, as it were, identity that the child acquires as they grow up and are socialized by their family, by their immediate surroundings, the extended family, if they have one, later kindergarten, school, the other children on the street, society at large, and nowadays, increasingly, the electronic media of communication of various sorts. And the child develops a sense of self. Each child looks in the mirror and at some point says, ah, that is little Annie or little Susie or little Tommy, and they know that they recognize themselves and they acquire a sense of who they are. But it's much later that that personal sense of belonging to mommy or daddy or grandma or grandpa, or of living on a certain street or in a certain countryside, is extended to a larger group. And this happens sooner or later, depending on the circumstances. For my generation as exiled children, when we first encountered children belonging to different nationalities, we developed what I have called a reactive identity. When somebody points their finger at you and calls you a dirty foreigner or a dirty Polak, and you say, hey, I'm not a Polak, I'm a Latvian, you realize who you are, whether you like it or not. And sometimes you like it because they're ready to play with you and they're quite friendly, and sometimes you do not because they're ready to throw stones at you and run after you and try and beat you up. And you discover that not all people are equal, and much as among your own people, you have some who, for instance, in my case, going to Latvian school in a refugee camp in Germany, some are friendlier than others, and so it is with foreigners. But when I befriended a little Estonian girl who had a curious little knitted cap with a geometric pattern and a sort of crown on top, something like Anne Boleyn, if you can think of her portraits, but a knitted cap with geometric designs, and I thought it was cute, and I asked her, how come you have such a cap and I see all these other Estonian girls have such caps? I thought they were nice. She said, well, Estonians wear them. And when I asked my mother, could I get a cap like that? My mother told me, Estonians wear them, Latvians do not. And it was as simple as that. And much as I liked the cap, I was told, no, you're not an Estonian, that is for Estonian girls, Latvian girls do not wear them. Later, in spreading across the different continents when refugee camps were closed in Germany, there were many almost tragic stories, certainly sad ones, of little girls starting to go to school, say, in Middle America, and being told by their mothers that decent little girls, when they go to school, must have long braids with ribbons and dresses with white collars and cuffs. And when they arrived in school, they were shocked to see that everybody was pointing fingers at them, and they were absolutely different from the other girls in school. And when they told their mothers that's not how American girls are dressing, the mother said, but you are not an American, you are a Latvian. And the poor child then had a choice to decide whether to remain different and obey mama and remain within the Latvian community, or to rebel as soon as her age would allow it, turn her back on Latvian society and Latvian identity, and forget about it as quickly as she could. What I spent my life doing was trying to convince young people of Latvian origin, starting with my own children, but also convincing myself, as I myself grew up, since I did grow up abroad, and not in my native country, that there was a third form identity, and which was a freely chosen one. And that is the one where you realize that belonging to a certain group, be it an ethnic group or a cultural heritage, a linguistic group, you may define it in different ways, but that what it does is it opens doors to you that would otherwise be closed. That learning the Latvian language, practically, you might say, spoken by so few people across the world, you'd be better off learning Chinese, no doubt. But for your identity and for your sense of well-being, for your roots being accessible to you, for that sense of belonging that comes from belonging to a community in which you have birthrights, you belong to them by birthright, that is something that you cannot be replaced by something else. You can become a new Canadian, an American naturalized citizen. You can travel to many lands and make a good living and marry a local person and fit in. And I have met many, many Latvians who said, I married an American girl, I fell in love with her, but she did not like my going with other Latvians to various Latvian events. She wanted me to turn my back on them. And I thought to myself, but she's turning her back on my identity. She's turning her back on who I am. But who I am is not so easily defined. And one of the things that I think defines who I am in that ethnic sense is, of course, that cultural heritage, to which knowledge of language, knowledge of history, in our case, knowledge of folklore, since that is a good part of our heritage, those are the riches that are available to those who open that door of belonging to the Latvian nation quite freely and without having to make that forced choice, being different from the others. One can blend in very easily when you're Latvian in a great many countries. You can blend in very nicely. Nobody will ever know by looking at you that you are a Latvian or of Latvian origin. But you can keep, and this is what I try to convince the youngsters from various countries that I came in contact with. You can keep, as it were, your secret garden, that Latvian identity that is your own, and that, of course, we would be more than happy to share with the rest of the world if somehow we could help them to overcome the language barrier and they could get to know about what it has to offer. In my own case, I have done that as well. I have done my own small efforts, if you like, in terms of writing scholarly articles and books about the Latvian heritage, about Latvian identity, and particularly about what in our Latvian folk songs makes them so extraordinary, so special, and so worth getting acquainted with, and so worth analyzing and entering into that international non-material heritage which UNESCO now for several years has been recognizing. For those of you who are in Latvia for the next few weeks, I quite recommend going to the Latvian Song Festival, watching it on television, seeing it on video. What we see in the Latvian Song Festivals is something that embodies the tradition of singing, which had been a pillar of Latvian identity for a great many centuries before Latvia ever became a nation. In the 19th century, when Latvians were still largely an oppressed class of society, they started singing in choirs, and when the choirs got together regionally and organized song festivals, they came to realize that one daughter was born in Riga and another was born in Valmiera, but they were singing the same song. They asked themselves the question that one of the folk songs asks: are they daughters of the same mother? And yes, they are daughters of the same mother who is the Latvian nation. And the singing and the coming together was one element that allowed them to become conscious of this Latvian identity. It allowed them to become conscious of the riches that that identity offered them, quite apart from the condescension and, in fact, the denigration that they had frequently suffered at the hands of those who had occupied the upper levels of society and the various occupying forces over the centuries. The Latvians recovered their sense of pride in themselves, not just their sense of an awareness of themselves as a nation, and through that awareness, they realized that they, as a nation, have the rights that belong to nations worldwide. And in many ways, this coming together and singing led to the thought of Latvian independence, the creation of an independent Latvian nation, and the tradition that managed to survive through various foreign occupations, through various imposed ideologies, that managed to survive in Australia, America, in Europe, elsewhere, behind the Iron Curtain on the other side. The tradition helped us to maintain our sense of roots, our link with the past, the sense of inheritance and entitlement that being Latvian meant to us. And this sense of entitlement, of course, makes us also fully European. This is why, as a president, I worked so hard to ensure that Latvia became a member of the European Union. This is why, since leaving office as president, I have been such an ardent promoter of European unity. But I must say that in addition to that, I find that from my experience as president of a nation, that I have acquired insights that are welcome elsewhere in the world. And I'm part of at least 3 different clubs and of great many organizations that have an international remit, that worry about the condition of women, that worry about transitions to democracy in various countries. And I find myself now, with my Latvian identity, laboring in the Lord's vineyards, which are really those of a citizen of the world. So that, having returned, like Ulysses, to the land of my birth, having been able to truly express my Latvian identity in a way that being born here should have predestined me for, I find myself also becoming a very ardent European. But most of all, I find that all these experiences, those of my nation, those of myself as an individual, those of my compatriots who suffered by being deported or otherwise repressed, all those sufferings that other nations, both in Europe and elsewhere, have gone through, have contributed in each case to developing our own sense of humanity. And I would leave you with this thought, that be your identity what it may, it must start with a sense of your intrinsic value as a person, as a human being, as a citizen of the world, as a member of the human race. It is this belonging, this sense of brotherhood or sisterhood with people who may look entirely different from you, who have different values at times, certainly different experiences, but who, after all, have the same life path that any human being has, from birth through development, growth, a career, experiences, joys and sufferings, and then, of course, we leave the stage, as Shakespeare says, having been but actors on this stage. I wish you all to spend your life looking for that solid ground under your feet, which is what your identity gives you. And remember, you don't have just one of them, you have many, and constantly in the course of your life, you keep having choices. You can construct who you are and who you want to be. Godspeed to you all.